Namaste and welcome to the Vijay Manthan podcast, a project looking to explore modern-day commentaries and issues facing society, facing humanity, all through a Hindu civilizational lens. Today, very excited to be bringing Yajur Haria to the platform. Yajurji has been on Vijay Manthan a few times before, discussing a number of things relating to ESG. Makes sense because he's the SVP and head of ESG analytics at a company called Reddington, which deal with all things sustainable investments. He's also Oxford alumni and the former NHSF president. Yajurji, welcome to the podcast.
Namaste. Thank you very much.
I think it's our pleasure to have you on here to discussing things that I think are quite important for the future of our society, who we are as a human race, and how we can go about funding change. So, Yajurji, for those that don't know and maybe have heard the term before, what does ESG mean?
Sure, it's a great question. So taking it back to basics, ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. It pervades all industries, so it's not just investments, but everyone is talking about ESG. And really, when we're talking about ESG and investing, what we mean is thinking about investments from a perspective that isn't just about money and returns, but also about the impact of nature on your investments, but the other way around as well. So the impact of your investments on nature. And there's a sliding scale. So it goes all the way from simply just taking into account ESG when you invest. So knowing, for example, what is your carbon footprint of your investments.
Sure. All
the way to saying, actually, I want my investments to do a little bit more. Right, so I want my investments to have a real world positive impact, and thinking about, well, how does it have a positive impact on the environment? How do we mitigate and adapt for climate change? To social change, how do we bring more diversity into the workplace? To ensuring that people of different genders and ethnicities have equal rights, but also equal opportunity. So really, it's a huge topic. I'm sure we won't be able to cover all of it, but it's definitely going to be an interesting discussion because there is just so much to talk about.
For sure. And I think that's one of the reasons we're here to talk to you about it because, I mean, you head that up at the firm you're at. What draws you close to a topic like this? Like, why is that your career?
So maybe just a quick step back. So I head up analytics. So just to be clear, there is a huge team here. I don't want to take credit for all of the work that we do. But I head up the ESG analytics section. And I suppose the reason why I moved into that space was, one, I've been doing modeling and analytics for my entire career. So there was a natural fit, a natural skills fit. But I've been thinking about society and environment and our impact on the wider world for a very long time. So, since I was 16 when I set up a Hindu society at my high school, through to when I joined NHSF at university, and then went on beyond that and really started thinking about the environment, my own personal impact on the environment. It's been something that I've been really interested in. It really draws out a passion in me. And over the last couple of years, there's been a real drive and focus on ESG within the workspace, within investments. And I saw it as an opportunity to really bring both my worlds together. And not everybody gets that opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So why not? So I really kind of jumped at the chance. Really drove the fact that I wanted to do this. And yeah, Reddington's been a great place where they've supported me the whole way to be able to do that. So yeah, I'm very fortunate.
Awesome, great to hear. And I can resonate with some of the sentiments about bringing some worlds together. So even in the career I work in, I've brought together my passions for communication and technology, and so that I do that for my clients. So you deal with the analytics of ESG. Can I break that down to a layman's way of saying the measurement of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so that's interesting because something like ESG is probably quite difficult to measure.
Yeah, it is.
What kind of things are being measured?
So you have to start by breaking it down into baby steps. So, and tackling one problem at a time. So we are really kind of breaking ground here. And the start of that has been climate change. So climate change has been in the news a lot more. We see a lot more attention being given to climate change, maybe because of the type of reports that are starting to come out, and us recognizing that there is a real need for us to change within this decade. But that's where we're starting. And so we're starting with simple things. I say simple, in reality, they are all very difficult, all complex, but simple things in concept. So things like measuring the carbon emissions of each company.
Sure.
So understanding, well, what are the carbon emissions that your company emits? And that's really difficult, right? Because for a coal company or an energy producer, it's maybe a little bit simpler to think about the emissions that they emit directly. But then what about companies that take on those services, so take on that energy? How do you have to include that as part of the emissions for that company?
So is that like sort of the supply chain?
For the supply chain.
Of what you're using. And so is this where the analytics become more in-depth or detailed? And would you say that depends on who wants to know the information?
Yeah, so it becomes a lot more difficult to the point where actually most of those emissions upstream and downstream in terms of supply chain are estimated. So you have to estimate them. And so there are lots of different ways in which you can estimate that stuff. But maybe we're getting into the weeds too much. But in essence, there's a lot of it's an incredibly complex issue where we are taking baby steps. We are starting to measure. We are starting with estimates to measure individual company carbon emissions, and then what we're doing is we're then trying to make those estimates better and better over time. And for investors, what they really care about is what does that look like at an aggregate level, and what does that decarbonisation path look like for their investment portfolio? So over a 10-year period, how do they reduce their emissions by 50%, and then by 2050, how do they get to 0%?
Sure, lots of terms in there that I want to pick up on. But my first question is, to what end? These investors looking at this, like you said, carbon emissions or decarbonisation efforts, and I'd like to ask about those two as well. What even are they? But what for? So that the funds are more profitable, or are we funding impact in another way?
In reality, a lot of this is driven by regulation.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So you'll have seen that nearly or more than 200 governments came together at COP26, which was in Glasgow last year. So there was a lot of news coverage about climate change at that point in time, and those governments made promises.
Right.
They made promises to limit global warming
By 2050? Earlier?
Yes. So in essence, they need to get to net zero by 2050.
Yeah.
But in essence, what they're saying more broadly is they want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2100.
Right.
Which means that we have to hit decarbonisation targets well before that. So in essence, we need to reduce our carbon emissions well before that to be able to stop global temperatures rising. Because any carbon emissions we emit today, even if we were to stop emitting today, the world is going to continue warming.
For sure.
For at least 15 to 30 years.
Let's just zoom out a second. So you said they're 2100.
Yes.
Now, for some people, that's beyond their lifetime.
It is.
Why would one care about that?
It's about conserving or preserving our world for future generations.
Okay.
Right? So when I think about climate change, one of the big reasons why I got into the space was because I now have a son. Right, and I mentioned that on previous VMs as well, but I have a 17-month-old son, Kush, and I started to think, well, what will happen to the world when he's my age? And that happens to be around 2050, when we need to have met our decarbonisation targets.
Very real world.
It's a real world thing.
I think it was Tagore that said, "The man who plants a seed, knowing he'll never bask in the shade of that tree, has at least begun to understand the meaning of life." So acting beyond your own means for a future generation, and in your terms, real life, literally your child, your son, to see what kind of world they'll live in. Okay, I take that sort of from a future perspective.
Yeah.
What about this concept of decarbonisation? Like, why is carbon such a big thing to people?
Yeah, so I suppose just taking a step back, when we say carbon emissions, we don't just mean carbon dioxide. There are lots of gases that are taken into that account. But in essence, what we're doing is we are estimating the total warming potential of these gases that we're emitting into the air, and we are converting it into a carbon dioxide equivalent, just so that it simplifies the metric a little bit. We can't, if you were to deal with this across all of the different gases that we're emitting, it becomes really complex.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've turned this into a single metric. And the reason why it's important is because for each ton of carbon dioxide that we emit, there is a direct link to how much warmer the world will get. And that matters because for every degree the world gets warmer, the ice caps will melt more, sea level will rise more, we will face more drought, we will have less food, we will have more fires, right? And we saw a lot of fires in 2020 in Canada, across America, and in Australia this year. These are real world impacts that we're feeling right now, just because we are 1 degree or 1.1 degrees warmer than we were before the industrial age.
So this aim then by 2030 or 2050, say, okay, so what needs to happen in the next 28 years for us to try and meet those targets? What is it the governments have come together and promised?
So really simply, as a world, we need to get to net zero.
What does that mean? What's net zero?
Net zero means that we need to have zero emissions being emitted after we take offsets into account. When I say offsets, what I mean is there are new potential carbon capture technologies coming out where we are drawing carbon dioxide out from the atmosphere. We are planting more trees, so we're reforesting. So taking those offsets into account, we need to have zero emissions emitted year on year for the foreseeable future.
Okay, is that the same as carbon neutral?
That is the same as carbon neutral. Yeah.
What's the one that, I mean, there's a few ways to phrase all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's why it's confusing for a few people. But what's the one that's not net zero? Is there one like that? I just confused myself.
So no. So there are zero emissions.
Okay. Right. That's not carbon neutral.
No.
What does zero emissions
mean?
So
zero emissions means that you are not emitting any CO2 equivalents out into the atmosphere. So you're not even having to take into account offsets. Like, you're not having to think about planting more trees.
Wow.
So you just aren't emitting any more.
What's a real
carbon emission?
Life example of this? So I know of a data center out in Crawley that draws in natural air and therefore is net zero.
Yeah, so that will be offsetting some of its carbon emissions.
Bad example.
And it may be that their energy provider isn't entirely sourced from renewable sources.
Okay.
Right? So if you get your energy from a renewable source, it's likely that the emissions will be very low, if not zero.
Okay.
But the difficulty with that and that ambition is that there are certain sectors that what we call in the industry as being hard to abate.
Right.
But effectively what that means is that it's really difficult to get to zero, right? Because, say for example, you have a
even breathing though is emitting carbon.
It is, but I suppose
so as humans, how can we ever be?
So what we're saying, I suppose, is from our extracurricular activities. So from the additional, from our broader activities, and I suppose population is certainly one, and you raise a really good point there, in that as the population grows, we're going to have more of a problem. So it's a really interesting point.
So is there a fund that looks after depopulation?
No, but it's really interesting because, obviously population
you could curtail population growth.
You can, and that that has other more obvious or maybe less obvious social implications and real problems there, right? So
which also feeds into ESG.
Yeah.
So it's all part of the same.
Which makes it really confusing, right? Really complicated, right? Because you have to. This isn't a tick box exercise. It's not a yes or a no.
I was going to ask that. So I work in cloud, and with some of the hyperscalers out there, they now have metrics built into their platforms to look at what your carbon emissions are for this website or that workload or this region, and the ability to switch to a greener supply of energy or resource for your computing needs.
Yeah.
Now, I can see why economically that would be useful to do, but I think, as we alluded to at the start of this episode, that it's not just about financial implications, but more of a holistic impact to society, to humanity. Don't know what my point was.
So let me take you up on that. So let's take climate change as an example.
Sure.
Right. So we could easily just say we want to get to net zero. Everyone has to cut off their emissions. We all switch to renewable sources of energy today. But what that does is, whilst we may be able to get a cheaper source of energy that way, and it will be cleaner, it's likely to be less secure. And what I mean by secure is renewable energy isn't, you can't just turn it on. You have to wait for the sun to shine, you have to wait for the wind to blow.
Sure.
And we haven't got enough batteries or kind of batteries that are good enough to be able to store enough energy to be able to then switch them on when the wind isn't blowing or when the sun isn't shining. Which means that at certain points, if you had a system that ran on 100% renewable energy,
it could topple.
It will topple, right? So you don't have secure energy. And what that means for millions of people, in particular, is the people at the bottom of the pyramid, is that they will be the ones that are most affected by blackouts. Imagine if it happens in winter, there's no heat, no energy for that.
So that, real world implications there.
You think about places like India, where it can get to 40, 45 degrees, 50 degrees in the summer in some parts. Imagine if there's no AC or there's nothing to keep the heat out.
So are we saying that our sustainable way of using energy isn't sustainable enough?
We have to be a little bit more nuanced about it.
Sure.
We have to really think about how we get there. And that's what people in the industry call just transition.
Okay.
So let's think about India, right? If they were to stop using coal today, it means that millions of people who iron shirts for a living are suddenly out of a job because a lot of their stores are powered by coal.
Sure.
So what implications does that have on those who are reliant on that source of income and likely to be at the bottom of the pyramid, right? At the bottom of the economic pyramid. So what happens there? And is that fair? Right? And so there was a lot of debate when India went to COP26 and didn't commit to net zero by 2050, but they said we'll get there by 2070 because we need more time.
Is that, and Judy Ling Wong mentioned this on a podcast I did with her, is that because of some of these carbon taxes coming in are stopping the East from having their next industrial revolution? Is it harder for them to do because of these financial burdens, restrictions?
Yes, absolutely.
And Judy mentions her answer to this is having the West, who didn't have to pay anything for their industrial revolution and the carbon they put out into the world back in the 70s, 80s, for them to fund the East.
Well, I'd actually say that it's probably it's probably even more than that. The East are paying for the West having developed as much as they have.
Oh, wow.
Because if you think about it, the historical carbon emissions have led to temperature rises, and who's paying for that? Where is that affecting? Who's that affecting?
This is deep.
Right? And so I'd go further than that.
Wow.
But it becomes very political. Who funds that?
Yeah, of
right?
course.
Who provides the funding to be able to transition huge nations like India and China? Right? How do you get there? Where does that funding come from? The World Bank didn't commit to net zero, and the World Bank is a major source of developing countries' funding. So who's funding it? The West needs to get to a place where they are able to agree where that funding comes from for developing nations to have a realistic chance of getting there without throwing billions of people under the bus.
Yeah.
Simply because they cannot afford to finance renewable sources of energy.
Wow. Okay. Seems like a mountainous task in front of us, but people are working towards trying to build out more sustainable ways of producing this. And I think so. We're trying to talk about funding change, and we've spoken about sort of countries now at a macro level.
Yeah.
What about at an individual level? Someone listening to this today thinking, yeah, I need to fund change. How do I do that? I don't earn enough money. I couldn't possibly support a foundation or a charity. Like, where does one start?
So maybe a little bit of an insight into the work that I do actually may help. The majority of my clients are pension funds. They're pension schemes. And members that they will have members just like our everyday listener who will be contributing into this pension scheme. That amounts to a huge amount of money. You're talking billions of pounds.
People probably don't actually think about this.
Yeah.
The 6% they give via salary sacrifice to their pension. Yeah. They probably just see it as something they collect later or funds their retirement. Yeah. But it's not just that. Where does that money go today before they receive it?
Exactly. How do you know you're not funding weapons?
So I have a friend that works for, I don't know if I should mention names. I have a friend that works for a large IT firm who is well known in producing arms, weapons of mass destruction, I don't know the technical terms. Yeah. And they have a moral conflict. They don't like to work for that company.
Well, in the same way, we have clients where who are in those industries. And the question is, what do you do from a moral perspective?
Yeah.
And what you have to recognize is that a lot of these clients will have different ambitions. But what you can do what I can do as a consultant is I can help them reach the ambitions around ESG that they care about and that we care about that do help move the world forward. So let's take a weapons manufacturer. If they want to get to net zero, you can either not help them get to net zero or you can. But the question is, are you helping move the dial for a positive change in the world, regardless of who you're working with? And are you helping them move forward? But and so the way that I see the problem, especially around conflicts of interest, is there are always going to be conflicts. Regardless of what you think, whether you perceive yourself as not having any conflicts whatsoever, you will have conflicts.
Sure.
The reality is that, and a really good example of this is the world needs to fund 100 trillion pounds worth of financing to be able to get to net zero by 2050. That will mean things getting more expensive for us. Let's take fuel.
Right.
That's a real example, right?
£2 a litre right now.
It's £2 a litre. There's a fuel duty on it. If you look at, I guess we can talk about politics because it's very real right now. Yeah. A lot of the candidates at the moment are talking about fuel duty cuts.
Sure.
That will make us feel good. Fuel will be cheaper for us. It will be cheaper for us to get around.
Right, but you're now going to say real world long-term implications of that are something else.
Exactly. There's a conflict of interest right there.
Okay, I get it. We're constantly conflicted. It's hard to be totally...
And so what I'm saying is make the decisions that help make a better world.
Okay.
And don't get too embroiled in trying to figure out what the motives are, right? Because everybody has a motive.
Yeah.
Right? And I get that this will be really controversial, right, what I'm saying, but we have to move past that if we want to actually move the world forward, because it's this distrust that is stopping us moving forward.
Okay, that's powerful. That's right? Quite powerful.
If you think about it, when governments get together, they negotiate, there is an inherent distrust when they talk to each other and think about how they move forward. Because if you're not doing it, why on earth should I do?
Yeah, and that's not a dharmic attitude.
No.
We should be, and I think you're suggesting we should be thinking, you've already mentioned by 2100, thinking about future generations, thinking of sustaining what is larger than us. And I think you're saying at a country level. So your suggestion was in this pension area is that an individual can effectively vote with their money and have their pension go in the right way. I've never spoken to my pension company. Should I?
So first thing you should do is figure out what you're invested in, right? So most schemes will have some way of you engaging with them, whether it be a contact detail, whether it be on the website.
Yeah, I get a PDF summary once a year, and it's got a nice chart in it telling me where all my money's been invested into.
So going forward, there will also be an ESG section.
How green are my investments?
How green are you? Right.
Interesting.
And at that point, you have a choice. Do you engage with that, and do you talk to the trustees of your scheme to try and move the dial? And do you talk to other members, and do you talk to wider society to do the same, or do you leave it?
So my thinking here is, really, what is the impact of me alone calling up my insurance, my pension company, and saying, "Hey, can you put more of my fund into a greener place?" So
let's take this. Let's take this point. The majority of your wealth, as you grow up and as you get older, the majority of your wealth will sit in your pension fund.
Okay.
Right. So if you're talking about investing money, the best way to make a financial impact without necessarily spending all your money is to look at your pension pot.
Okay, so I don't have to worry about net what I take home. You're talking about the pension that's already going out that I don't see until I'm probably, it's going to be like over 70, 75 retirement age by the time we get there. You're saying that's the best way of impacting change?
Yes, because if we can get more members to engage with their schemes, if we can get more schemes to be greener, we are literally talking billions of pounds and potentially trillions of pounds towards climate change and mitigating and adapting for it. And I suppose what I need to maybe an example of this is really good. So, our carbon accounting is really bad, right? Our mental accounting is really poor as individuals.
Yeah,
right?
I can imagine.
And one example I really like to give is people like to say that they want to save water.
Okay.
Right. And so when they say I want to save water, they'll say I'll do that by taking shorter showers.
Yeah, you get these little timers now. You can,
you can even get valves, right? Which
cut your water.
Well, no, so it actually it pumps more air into your water, so you get the same pressure, less water usage. But for the equivalent of a year's worth of shorter showers, if you had one less, and I don't know how many of our listeners actually eat meat, but if you had one less hamburger, beef burger, whatever it is, you're likely to be offsetting the two.
Wow.
Right. So one less hamburger, beef burger, one less cow that's grazing in your field that's been brought up specifically to be killed to have meat on your plate will save you as much water as a year's worth of short showers.
That is amazing, and
and so what I'm saying is that financially, your pension scheme is your beef burger. You can, with very little effort and without necessarily losing a lot, you can make a massive impact on climate change by lobbying your scheme to be greener.
Okay, great point. You mentioned once before on Vichar Manthan that by engaging your pension fund actually drives them to create more revenue. So I don't want to decorate that point too much, but thought it's worth mentioning. The other thing about this thread I want to pull on is I'm being asked, or you're suggesting that I make a change at an individual level. Mm-hmm. And the people that have those shorter showers also maybe feel responsible. What about big corporations that waste prolific more amounts of water or are not? Is this where you're saying let's have a mature conversation, not worry about that?
So I suppose what I'm saying is One is we have to understand where we can make an impact, and we have to be really smart about that.
Fair enough,
right?
yeah.
The second point is just around that. Corporations don't waste just simply because they can.
Okay.
It's driven by consumer habits.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's
Right.
coming back to the individual.
Right? So an example being, so I mentioned my son, right? He's 17 months, he loves toys. I'm sure a number of parents are listening, and I'm sure that they are constantly buying gifts, new toys, new clothes, new things that they will, they shower them with new things because they think that that's the best thing that they can do. They want the best for their child. Me and Son, we had a chat about this. Son was my wife. We had a chat about this maybe a year ago. And we started buying everything secondhand for Kush.
Okay.
One, because actually as he grows really quickly, and he'll use something for maybe a couple of months and then he's done.
So this is your awareness of impact of buying things.
Yeah. But by buying wooden toys, by buying secondhand toys, you are using fewer resources. And it may not have a massive impact if I'm doing it on my own, but it doesn't have a massive impact on him either.
Fair.
And in reality, the financial gains from that are great.
Okay, yeah.
So why would I choose to go new? But people don't think like that. People think new is better. And what I need people to do is start making smarter decisions about where they can preserve their quality of life, right? That's the first decision. How do you preserve your quality of life whilst reducing your impact on the world?
That's great.
Right? That's the first step.
Yeah.
And there's a lot you can do.
Yeah.
Right? The next step is, well, what sacrifices am I willing to make to have a positive impact on the world that happens faster, that happens now, so that I am preserving the world for future generations?
Do you think that's an easy...
And if you were to ask any mother, they would say that they would sacrifice anything for their child.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Right? So why not think about that in 30 years' time, 40 years, 50 years? How many of our listeners are actually saving money for their child now? Right? Just born, they'll be putting money into investments for them because they are thinking 30, 40 years in advance. So why aren't we thinking about it like that from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective?
Great points. I'm on board with it. Just so that I can sum up the point, we're saying that the best thing a person could do is maybe change where their pension goes. So for someone listening at home, what's that call to action? Call up your pension company and ask for at least an understanding of how green your investments are, and ask them to maybe change it to a greener one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the very first step. First, find out what is your impact. I would even go to other. There are a number of providers that will actually help you figure out what your carbon footprint is.
Wow.
Right? Do it. A lot of the time it's free. Right?
This is going to become a bigger and bigger thing. I was reading some news articles about when you shop for things, you'll now be able to see the carbon footprint, that item, that carton of milk, that whatever it is, even...
I mean, I recently booked a flight and I could see what my carbon impact was of that flight. Right?
This is good. And then there was, even in your health apps, you can now measure... This is another big indicator of who you are and the impact you have on the world. Will we start to compare carbon footprints? Could that present bigger social problems?
Yeah, could be. You could gamify it, right? Why not?
The water bottle I got free the other time, there's an NFC chip built into it.
Okay.
And when I tap it, it tells me how many plastic water bottles I've saved by using this.
Yeah.
And I think the gamification of that, it's okay.
Yeah.
I do wonder, though, where that could be a slippery slope.
Yeah. And what we have to be really careful of is that doesn't lead us to making bad decisions. So a really clear example of a bad decision is us saying that we need to have a zero landfill policy today, right? Because all that does
shifts the problem.
Is it shifts the problem to another country, right? So we have to make sure that we're making smart decisions and we're not tripping other people up because this has to be a global effort.
And got to be beneficial for all.
Yeah.
This is another dharmic concept, right?
Exactly.
And so you mentioned the COP26 that took place. Are there agreed upon actionables that countries have put together? Could we just talk about one or two of those?
So nations came together in COP26 in Glasgow last year and they agreed their policies and their targets that they wrote down, and that they were willing to commit to. And so those nations have now committed to getting to net zero on their own timelines, but they have now made those commitments. And they have also committed to come back year on year and what's called a ratcheting system, but effectively not just report, but make those commitments better, to be more ambitious year on year. Accelerate. So as they start to learn more, as we start to learn more about climate change and the technologies that are available, we leverage that and we be as ambitious as we can be.
It all sounds very utopic.
Yeah.
What's going to be the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge, there are lots of challenges, but I think that the biggest challenge is the politicization of the idea of a just transition. Because what we have there is conflicts. You have people that are reliant on coal, where their emissions are directly impacting people who are trying to reduce. And reducing their emissions by removing the coal will have a massive social impact on them and their families and the communities. And so finding a balanced approach that gets us to net zero quickly enough, but not too quickly, is going to be really difficult.
And I imagine curveballs will come in, such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Exactly.
That's probably changed a lot of what money means and is located. Like McDonald's had to move out of Russia overnight or whatever.
I mean, the amount of fossil fuel usage in Europe and UK alone has gone through the roof since we stopped being reliant on Russia.
But that's a concentrated effort by, I think, the world to stop doing business with Russia. So someone somewhere has had to sign off on that being the best thing to do for all the reasons above.
Exactly. But there's also an element of short-termism.
Okay.
That's embedded in there. And I'm not saying that I know what the right decision is. Sure. And the decisions that we've made may well be the right ones. All I'm saying is that we have to make sure that we step back at every point and think, are we doing the best that we can? And are we honestly saying that is the best that we can do?
If you are enjoying this podcast so far, and if you would like to help us to invest in ideas that matter, then we could do with your support. All you have to do is become our well-wisher. You can sign up for a monthly donation via our website, which is vicharmanthan.org. By you becoming a well-wisher, this supports our work, and together we can invest in ideas that matter. Thank you for listening.
All I'm saying is that we have to make sure that we step back at every point and think, are we doing the best that we can? And are we honestly saying that is the best that we can do?
I think that's a good segue into this concept of greenwashing.
Yeah.
Now, I'll refer back to the space in which I operate in cloud computing. And sometimes we get clients that want to show they are green or they've got a green workload because it ticks a box.
Yeah.
I would question if their intentions are, pure or direct.
Yeah.
Not because I'm morally judging. At the end of the day, they're my clients. I need to satisfy their needs.
Yeah.
But does it really solve the problem?
Yeah.
And is that ticking a box an example of greenwashing?
Yeah.
It's me having an NFC chip in my bottle, thinking about how many plastic water bottles I've saved. Is that greenwashing?
To some extent it is. So if you think about a tote bag that you may take in to do your shopping, right? You've decided to replace your plastic bag with a tote bag instead. And you're thinking, I'm saving the world because I'm not putting more plastic in the world. And from that lens, you're using less plastic.
Yeah.
That's a great thing.
Cool.
From a carbon emissions perspective, you need to have used that bag 1,000 times before you've offset the emissions for a single plastic bag to be used.
I wish you didn't tell me that. Well, I'm glad you have.
So you better use your plastic. You better use your tote bag until it is rags.
But that doesn't happen.
But you have to. But this is my point, right? That
who's responsible for that? I feel like I've been fed a lie here.
No. So we are responsible.
Sure. Okay.
Right? Like Yes, governments will step in. Governments will make regulatory changes.
Provide
they
guidance.
will drive a lot of innovation, right, as they have done in the past. They will put money in to help us get there. But at the end of the day, it is for us to decide whether or not you really need a new pair of shoes because your old ones are a little bit dirty and they look a bit worn for wear. Or do you try and mend them? Do you try and fix them? Do you try and get them to a place yourself and you continue to use them, right? It is about putting in the effort. And it is difficult, right? I'm not saying it's not.
I think that requires high discipline.
It requires discipline. But if people really understood how grave the situation was with climate change, with with loss in biodiversity, if they really understood, more people would make that change, right? So let me take another example, right? We all eat almonds, right?
Yeah, I like almonds.
Majority of the world's almond production is in California, right? Something like 80% of almonds are made there or grown there.
Are you about to put me off my almonds?
I am, potentially. If you're an almond lover, you may not know, but you need bees to pollinate to be able to grow the almond trees, is it?
Plant, I'm not sure. Yeah. Part of the supply cycle.
Yeah, but there aren't enough bees in California. Right, there are no bees actually in California.
Do they import bees?
So they have to import bees to keep the almond trade alive.
Because the almond trade is so demanding.
Exactly, and if bees went extinct, you would have no more almonds.
So I feel like it's a catch-22.
Right. So what I'm saying is that today there are no bees or no
Not enough bees.
Indigenous bees in California.
So we're manufacturing bees
We
now?
are having to import bees.
And that obviously damages their whole ecology and everything that happens.
In
with
the
bees.
UK, we are importing bees, right?
What does that say about our nature?
Right? When you were a kid, I'm sure you'll have noticed, when you were a kid, there were bugs everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? And I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine about this today. If you look around, there are noticeably fewer bugs.
Yeah, I can agree
Right?
to that.
That's biodiversity. We are having warmer summers now. There are wildfires happening now in Australia. There were huge wildfires in Canada, in America. Wildfires also impact our companies. If there's a wildfire and if you have gas lines going through them, you don't have a gas supply anymore, right? This problem is going to have a massive impact on us. By 2100, if we don't stop sea level rise, right, and that's an impact, that's a direct consequence of climate change and of global warming, London will be underwater.
No way.
New York will be underwater. Mumbai will be underwater. California will be underwater. Florida will be underwater.
If we carry on the way
We carry on. There will be no more Maldives. These things will happen, right?
that trajectory is already mapped out.
That is mapped out if we don't stop emitting as soon as we can. And even if we limit emissions and we achieve 1.5 degrees,
That's still not enough.
some of that, like the Maldives may be gone.
Wow.
Right.
So that's why we need the accelerated pace.
We need to do as much as we can today, right? And if we don't, we're going to lose a lot of the world that we know, right? And that's, I suppose that's what I'm trying to get, that none of this is proven science, right? It's all probabilistic. But how much of a chance are you willing to take on your children's lives and on their children's lives?
Powerful words here on the Vichar Manthan podcast, talking about funding change with Yajur Haria. Yajur, I think we're going to go into what I call the rapid fire round.
Okay.
We'll ask some rapid questions of you, and hopefully they're a little bit more sustainable. So let's get into it. What goes into your perfect breakfast smoothie? And you can't say almonds.
I can't say almonds anymore, can I? No, so I would say bananas, cocoa nibs, chia seeds, and blueberries.
Pretty healthy. I like that. Yeah. Cool.
And oats.
And oats. Baked oats.
Not baked oats. Not for the smoothie, but do love a good baked oat.
Good stuff. What's your favourite book?
My favourite book. recently read a book on The Value of Everything by Mariana Mazzucato. That really took me by surprise. Really like that one.
Okay. What's the best piece of advice you have ever been given?
Seize every opportunity, I think. I didn't really, it's very cliche, but there really are opportunities everywhere, and until I realised what that meant and until I started seizing opportunities, I didn't appreciate it.
Sure.
But I would definitely give that to anyone, I'd give that advice to everyone. Seize every opportunity, so whether that be climate change, whether that be your job, whatever it is, seize every opportunity.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Turn back time.
Ooh.
I would turn back time.
To when? Or is that, have you not thought about
No,
that?
I would. Again, it makes me sound like I'm all about climate change, but I would turn back time to tell people that things are real, that things are going to happen. Start making change whilst you can.
Is there a particular time
there isn't a particular time,
Okay.
a point in time. You can always say pre-industrial revolution, but
Right.
the technology didn't always exist. But I don't know. I'd love to be able to wind back time and to have conversations and understand, the stories there of why we made the decisions that we did, because I'm sure that there were very good reasons for us doing that, so that maybe we might be able to make better decisions going forward as well. So not necessarily always having to change the past, but to help inform the future as well.
Fair play. Deep. If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take 3 items with you, what would they be and why?
That's a very good question. I would take a Kindle.
Okay.
I would take a solar battery to power that Kindle. And I suppose I would have downloaded plenty of books. What else would I take? I would take an umbrella.
Okay.
The reason why I'd take an umbrella is because I've recently seen it's a great way to gather water.
Interesting. Okay, I was thinking it's not just for the shade then. Could you describe for me a moment in your life where your paradigm shifted?
Yes. So actually, it was when I took part in in SIP, so Sung Internship Program. And so it was a 7-week program where we had a clear results-orientated objective, and it was being measured. And during that process, I realized that I can make change. I can do things that are very real. I can make. I can achieve results, and that changed how I approached problems to being very results oriented. Even to the point where, when I'm thinking about whether or not I should say something, if I'm annoyed at someone or whatever, I even and Sonal constantly hates me for saying this to her, but I think what is the outcome going to be of me saying this?
Sure.
Right? Is this going to be on balance? Is this going to be a good thing to do?
Right.
And that internship really helped cement my understanding of impact, like my potential ability to make impact. So I that was a real pivotal moment for me, I think.
Wow. Impressive. What does the term sustainability mean to you?
So sustainability is 2 things to me. So one is, from a dharmic perspective, I've held sustainability close to my heart. It means to preserve, to uphold. For me, it means to act in a way that enables future generations and the ecosystem to exist without destroying itself or destroying others. Right? That for me is sustainability, to be able to exist without negatively impacting someone else, and hopefully finding a way to positively impact them. And from an investments perspective, it means investing in such a way, from a company perspective even, to operate a company in a way that doesn't negatively impact the world, but also to operate the company in a way that is sustainable so that it can continue to operate. Right? Like having a company that isn't profitable but is super sustainable doesn't help the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So there's two angles there, and all of this is all about balance. Right? It's all about balance. Sustainability in your lives, but also within investments, it's always about balance and finding that right balance and finding that, understanding those nuance points. So that for me is sustainability.
It's amazing. That's remarkably noble as well. Thank you for that. If you had to fight one horse-sized chicken or 10 chicken-sized horses, which would you pick?
Chicken-sized horses.
10 of them.
Yeah, I don't think I could. I'm quite a small guy, so even if it was just one chicken, horse-sized chicken, I don't think I'd be able to necessarily overwhelm it in any kind of way. And I'm not smart enough to overcome a chicken, So who knows? But 10 chicken-sized horses, maybe I could get away with it. Maybe I could run away. I don't know.
Seems all manageable. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, last one then. And I always offer my guests on the Vichar Manthan podcast an opportunity to make a commitment that makes them more sustainable or more wholesome or solidifies their impact on society in some way. So is there something that you'd like to commit to here today? Maybe it's something you've been putting off for a while or something you should do or make your next step be. You said you like to seize opportunities. So is there something you'd like to share?
I do. I like to seize opportunities. So one of the things that I've done recently is I've stopped eating egg, which was a massive shift for me. But I did it because I couldn't do it anymore, in essence. The next step is dairy, but it feels unsustainable right now, so I'm not going to commit to dairy. But more generally, I think what I will commit to is thinking in more depth about the food I eat, how I eat it, being healthier, but also thinking about the impact my food has. So eating fewer avocados, for example. So really thinking about the impact my food has. I think that's the commitment I will make.
That's amazing. That's great to hear. I think also challenging for a lot of people. Yeah. One would argue avocados are a great source of nutrition.
Yeah. So and that's what I mean. So it's that's why I'm not committing to dairy, because I sustainably I don't think I'd be able to commit to it for the long term right now.
Why avocados then?
So not necessarily just avocados, but fewer avocados.
But you use it as an example. So whether it's the almonds or
avocados have a huge carbon impact, right? We import them all the way from Peru, I think, right? But thinking more about having more locally grown foods, being braver about having the wonky carrots and the wonky parsnips and the odd onion that doesn't look quite right? Having those and having the blueberries that don't look quite right. Getting more food from organizations like Oddbox. So that I think that's the kind of thing that I want to do more often, and I feel like I could do that more often as well.
Awesome, thank you. I think we'll end the rapid fire round there. Topic of conversation today, which is funding change.
Yeah.
And we mentioned earlier about ways in which an individual could fund that change, and arguably their pension pot is the best way. During our brief, we talked about natural capital, how important that is. Could you shed some light on that for our viewers, please?
Yeah, so natural capital is effectively natural wealth, right? So more than 50% of businesses are reliant. So this is 50% of businesses around the world are entirely reliant on nature. Right, or they have some reliance, a significant reliance on nature. So what I mean by that is that if the natural ecosystem collapsed, those 50 companies are likely to go, right? So natural capital is incredibly important, but we don't take that into consideration when we think about investments, costs, land use. We don't think about preserving natural capital. We think about using it here and now. And the ramifications of that are really clear to see. So you can see that soil degradation has been apocalyptic, right? You even had Jeremy Clarkson talking about it on a couple of his shows, saying that he probably had one or two crops left, right?
And also Sadhguru's latest campaign is on saving soil.
Saving soil. And so natural capital is all of that, right? It's everything natural that helps us operate our businesses, our lives.
So we mentioned Sadhguru's campaign for Save Soil, and actually a few years ago he did Rally for Rivers. So he's definitely quite focused on natural capital, natural resources, and one would argue in a dharmic way, looking literally at the elements that we use as a society. He's coming in from India with that lens, that dharmic lens. How does it work today? What's happening in the West? How are our funds, and what are we actually funding?
So maybe we start by thinking about what is dharmic, right? So I have my own ideas, so these are my own, but I hope it goes some way to shape the conversation around what a dharmic investment looks like. What is dharmic? What is sustainability in a dharmic lens? I talked about this idea of positive change, nuanced change, balance. We need to approach every problem with that balance by looking for the nuance and understanding problems, being empathetic to every person and every situation. So even those that are using coal, being empathetic to their position and understanding, well, what is the right decision? How do we move the dial for a positive, holistic change, right? That is dharmic. What's happening at the moment within the investments industry, or certainly how ESG started off, was it started off being a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
And the reason was that it was started by Abrahamic faiths, right? So the first ESG funds were Catholic funds, where they said they did not want to invest in prostitution, in guns and in weaponry. You then had your Sharia funds, where they do not invest in pork, or the pork industry. But they are tick box exercises. Effectively, what they do is they exclude entire sectors and industries from their investment, and they have it's a relatively simplistic view on what sits well with their faith.
So sort of like a governed investment.
Yes, what they call it's an exclusionary criteria.
Okay.
Right. A dharmic fund wouldn't work like that.
Because you're looking at everything, totality.
It's complex.
Yeah.
Right. What works for one industry, one sector, in one region, doesn't work elsewhere. Right. So you have to approach the problem from a more holistic view with more data.
Right.
Right. Because the reality is that what I don't want to sound is that I don't want to sound idealistic. Because in reality, we don't have the resource to be able to think about every investment to that level.
You can't measure all change, but you could at least try to nullify harm.
Yeah, and the solution is really is to gather data, to understand that data, and to try and understand, well, what is the impact, right? Removing the politics from that decision and understanding, well, what is the real world positive impact that these decisions are going to have, so that you can invest in a more nuanced way, but invest across multiple industries, across multiple sectors, multiple companies, right? So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that investing dharmically is different because it requires us to be more nuanced.
Sure.
It requires us to be data savvy. It requires us to be removed in some ways from the politics of the world so that we can make better decisions to move the needle.
So try maybe not to be attached to the fruits of the labour,
Right,
but see the total goal, which sounds quite, again, like you said, idealistic. To play devil's advocate, and for someone that might be biased towards action, could wanting to get these data points or create the systems where we can collect that data stall actions we take today?
So you always work to the best of your ability and under the assumption that you will never have perfect data.
Okay.
right?
So is it
every model will be wrong, right? So every
Right.
model is wrong. But some models are more wrong than others.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So find the best model you can, understand it, be intelligent about it. Find people around you that are able to help you understand this stuff.
Sure. So develop a capability rather than
Exactly.
Be
exactly
halted by anything.
That's exactly it. And that's exactly what I'm asking of the dharmic community, to be smarter about this.
Okay.
Right? Because we have to be. Otherwise, there's a very real risk that what we perceive to be dharmic really isn't.
So I think we've given one example of big impact, maybe the biggest impact with individuals' pension pots.
Yeah.
Is there another one? Could we take it a step further? Because I could do that tomorrow, right?
Yeah, you could do that. Absolutely, you could do that tomorrow.
So I could. What else could I do?
There's a whole host of things that you can do. So the thing that you could do, and this may sound small, but I think in the grand scheme of things this could be quite big, is think about rewilding. Right.
Okay.
So what I mean by that, so the government recently has been encouraging people to rewild their gardens. So effectively have a portion of your garden that you don't touch. Right. So you let the grass grow long. And what that does is it encourages more insects to come back to our urban areas, to our residential areas, increase biodiversity around us. And it may sound small. It may sound like I'm telling you to do nothing. And in many ways I am. I'm telling you just to leave nature.
Yeah, don't cut the grass.
Right? But in some ways we think that we're making our lives better by cutting the grass so it's clean and it's neat. And we like to put everything in neat, clean boxes. But the reality is that it doesn't work for nature. Right? So start with that. Right? Get used to the idea, especially mentally, get used to the idea that nature is messy, and that's okay. And maybe that may not have a massive impact today, but what that does is it starts to shift mindsets around how we need to think about nature and how we need to coexist with it.
So someone listening to this on the Vicharamanta podcast would say, Yajur said, don't cut the grass, right? And, I can get on board with that, and I understand increasing biodiversity. But can we just decorate a bit further? What is the impact of that? What's the real world impact?
So the real world impact of that is genuinely us starting to bring more insects and bugs and butterflies back into our lives. They rely on tall grassy areas, marshlands, grasslands, to be able to survive, right? That's effectively what this area was where we're living now.
Yeah. But why? So what?
Right.
More butterflies, now what?
So more butterflies, more bees, right? We go back to this point around almonds, right? Our world is so reliant on bees. But more insects means better pollination. Better pollination means that we have more wildlife in terms of plants, better oxygen, better soil, right? Because if you rewild nature, that it allows
that
nature to
system
rebalance.
And then, better food, more nutritious food, more sustainable living.
Exactly.
I think lots of people need to be shown that impact story we just spoke about. And not just about, the bees and the butterflies and the long grass, but in all areas of life.
Let me take it in reverse then. We all believe in the Amazon forest.
Yeah.
Right? We believe that it is there and we need to preserve it.
Sure.
That it is helping our planet. It is effectively helping to maintain and stabilize our planet because of the amount of CO2 it absorbs and the amount of oxygen it outputs.
Yeah, I believe that.
Namaste and thank you for listening. Vicharamanthan attempts to start the conversation and keep it going in an earnest manner. We are here to talk, discuss and dissect societal challenges using a civilizational lens. Tune in at vicharamanthan.org to find out more.
The Amazon is a messy place.
Yeah.
Right? And what's happening now is that the Brazilian government has effectively allowed us to cut it down by making it a civilized world, by cutting roads into it, by building into the Amazon forest. And if we were to look at that today, from the UK and we went to visit these sites, we'd say this is a civilized world. But what we're doing, and this is the story in reverse, is that we're cutting down the Amazon forest. We are making the world a cleaner place, but nature needs some of that mess.
Okay.
It needs that complexity. It needs that diversity, right? And if we cut out the Amazon forest, effectively, what we are doing is we are effectively emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because we aren't able to absorb it.
Yeah.
Which leads to more global warming, etc.
And the offset doesn't exist either because you're actually cutting the trees down.
I know what you're asking for is the opposite. It's really difficult to show that because that's years in the making.
Yeah.
But we're doing the opposite now, and we can see the impact of that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm hoping that maybe that helps shed some light in terms of why we need that biodiversity. Because I really do think we need it.
For sure. And hopefully we'll try and decorate more impactful stories around this at a later date, perhaps. Yajur, thank you for coming on to Vijayamantan podcast, helping us understand a little bit more about environment, social, governance, corporate, natural capital, lots of things we've spoken about today. And I think I'll definitely need to go back and listen to this a few times to really get my head around it, to see what impact I can make and how to invest in ideas that matter and really fund change. But is there a parting comment or some words of advice or offer some opinions or guidance to our listeners about how they can fund change?
Well, look, it goes back to that point that we spoke about pension funds. I would ask every single listener to go online now, find your pension fund, find out information about it, and get in touch with the trustees. It's something you can do, as you mentioned, you can do that tomorrow, you can do that today. So I would say do it, right? There is nothing stopping you from doing that. You are not committing to anything right now. All you are doing is you're finding out. And then the next steps may become more clear as you find out more.
Thank you. Thank you so much again, Yajur, for coming on to VM Podcast. And we'll leave a link in the description below as to where people can sort of follow your movements and the recommended book and things like that. But for all our listeners out there, please do email in. You can catch us at podcast@vijayamantan.org. I would very much like to hear what you thought about what we've discussed today. And I think I've mentioned this a few times before. Vijayamantan is not a platform where we necessarily come to a conclusion, but rather ask you to ask more questions. Hopefully we can open the dialogue on situations and modern day issues that impact us all. How can we fund change? Listen back to the last hour of this podcast and hopefully you'll be able to join the fight. This was the Vijayamantan podcast. My name is Sumit Sharma. Thank you once again for listening. Namaste.